So this is the culmination of all my research. My paper is titled "The Fine Art of Brotherhood, Racism in Fraternities in the 1950s." And so how I really came about this topic was I'm currently in a sorority here at Plattsburgh, which I'm sure some of you guys can see my sisters here.
Welcome, no, we didn't notice.
Come history.
And I knew I wanted to present something that I was passionate about, and so I chose, originally I wanted to talk about a sorority that was here at Plattsburgh State from the early 1900s up until 2005. But as my research went on, I realized that I was only interested in one particular time period, and that was the 1950s. And that has a lot to do with a band, a SUNY-wide band that you'll hear more about in my presentation as we go on. But what really caught my attention was the band and the cause of this band. And at its face value, it was just about racism. And from this racism was predicated on exclusionary membership requirements. So in order to be a part of a national fraternity at this time, or what it seemed to be, you had to be Caucasian and you had to be Christian. And so I'm going to go into that a little more as my presentation goes on, but right now I'm going to talk about two of my main sources that I used. The first one is an unpublished work. It's called Brothers Now and Always, and it's the story of a fraternity at SUNY Albany and the struggle they had with these restrictive membership clauses. And while my research is locally focused in a way, a name kept popping up. I kept seeing this name, Alfred McClongley, and he was everywhere. He's published a lot of different articles, and he published his articles in the 1950s while this was going on. He was the national, I guess, leader of this movement and a study of what was going on. So, the 1950s. In 1950s, the Yankees had just won the World Series for the second year in a row. Walt Disney released Cinderella to critical acclaim, but there were other things going on that weren't as happy and as exciting. We see this movement towards desegregation in the United States, and we see in the military in 1948 with the desegregation of the armed forces. As you guys can see right up there, the Committee on Civil Rights from President Truman had wrapped up at the very end of the 1940s, and the Supreme Court is making decisions in favor of desegregation in cases like Brown v. Board of Ed and Sweat v. Painter. And so, fraternity and sorority life, or mostly fraternity life, was not exempted from this trend. We see a lot of undergraduates specifically looking to desegregate fraternities. And before World War II, it's written out in the Constitution and bylaws of these national organizations, you must be of full Aryan blood to be in our organization. And at the end of 1945, there's this real push and this pressure to reform that and to change that. A lot of national organizations reacted by moving them from their constitution and bylaws, turning them into gentlemen's agreements, making them behind closed doors so that to the public you couldn't really see them. So this is my thesis here. It says, the movement to strike restrictive membership clauses was led by undergraduates. These students were the product of the GI Bill. They were fueled by a desire for autonomy and were divorced from the tradition of the old fraternity. And as we'll go on, you'll see what I mean by the old fraternity. And so before we go anywhere else, I'm going to explain how a national fraternity works at the time and how a local organization works at the time, because that's going to be something key to understand. So up there on your left, you see national organization explanation. So you start at the very bottom with a chapter. On any given campus of any national fraternity, there is a chapter on a campus, and those chapter is made up of general members who will elect an executive board. That executive board will then send delegates who are from the college. They are members of the fraternity, college age, to the National Executive Board or the convention. Convention is the body that governs a national fraternity, and that happens about every 2 years. And so, in between those times, you'll have the National Executive Board governing. And the National Executive Board are alumni. They're older members. They're not collegiate members. And then from the National Executive Board, they'll send delegates to the National Interfraternity Council. Council. The National Interfraternity Council works as a kind of United Nations where every national fraternity will send a delegate to the National Interfraternity Council. And they will set general, widespread rules that every fraternity that is a member should is encouraged to follow. And those delegates will bring that back to the National Executive Board and back to the convention. The convention will bring them back to the executive boards, and the executive boards will take what the bureaucracy above them has said and turn it into how to run day-to-day functions of the fraternity. And so you can see there's a lot of oversight that goes on as far as when you're in a national organization. That's going to be key. And if we look on the other side, we see a local organization where you have general members that elect an executive board. That's it. There's no more oversight aside from whatever each specific college wants to give that particular fraternity, sorority, community, or alumni do often have some say in what goes on in a chapter. And so something I want to point out is right above executive board chapter, that's where you're going to start to see this split between the old fraternity, and now I'm going to come in with a new term, the new fraternity, and I'll explain that a little more as we go on. And so I'm going to jump right into the first thing that grabbed my attention in my research, 1953 SUNY-wide ban. So in 1953, there was a ban on national fraternities and sororities on SUNY campuses. So if you were on a SUNY campus, you had to be a local organization. You guys can't really see the resolution there, but that's pretty much what it says. It's headed up by William Carlson, who was the president of SUNY at the time. And you'll hear more about what caused the ban later on, but it was mostly motivated by racism. And the reason that fraternities weren't banned in general is because there was this belief that local organizations were less racist, less discriminatory than the national organizations. And that's why they continued to allow fraternities and not ban them altogether, although there were some movements during the time nationally to get rid of them. And so now I'm going to move on to the old fraternity. The old fraternity is what you think of as soon as you hear the word fraternity, and the first thing you think is elitist, you're thinking of this group of men and women at the time. They're people who joined a fraternity prior to 1945. These were the people who perpetuated and who took part in restrictive membership clauses. So if you weren't a full Aryan blood, if you weren't Caucasian, if you weren't Christian, you could not join their fraternity. And we see that this stereotype still kind of lives on today in fraternity and sorority life. And we do have someone who kind of personifies the old fraternity. Some of you might recognize him. This is David Embry. This is a picture from the cover of his book, The Fine Art of Mixing Drinks, published in the 1950s. And he was the chairman of the National Interfraternity Council. So his ideas, that's where the council went. It was his vision. And he was, in flat terms, a racist, extremely discriminatory, a member of a fraternity, obviously during his college days. And I just have a quote here to kind of give you his mentality. It says, "I love the discriminating tongue, the discriminating eye, the discriminating ear, and above all, the discriminating mind and soul. The person for whom I can find no love and no respect is the indiscriminate person. To be indiscriminate is to be common, is to be vulgar." So clearly, we're dealing with someone with a very different outlook from many of our own. And so now, I'm going to take you guys to the new fraternity. These are the members that are joining after 1945. The best example I can give you of the new fraternity is Alpha Pi Alpha. So the history of Alpha Pi Alpha starts out in 1915 with the Gamma chapter of Kappa Delta Rho. Kappa Delta Rho, and you can see their pin right there in the middle of the screen, founded in 1915, was a national fraternity. They existed on Albany's campus from 1915 until 1951. In 1951, something really strange happened to the men of then Kappa Delta Rho. They sent in 4 applications for membership, and those applications for membership were denied, and they were denied strictly on the basis of religion. The 4 men's application that they sent in had marked themselves as Jewish. And so they were rejected, and the chapter didn't understand why. And it's because of this restrictive membership clause that had moved from being in Constitution and bylaws strictly to a gentleman's agreement, and the chapter did not know. And so, after much consideration, the entire Kappa Delta Rho Gamma chapter resigned and formed a new fraternity. They didn't want to be a part of that organization, or one that was going to be discriminatory. And that's why the local chapter is key here. They can decide who their brothers are, who they can invite membership to. And this is the reported reason for the ban that we see in 1953. This is all happening in 1951. William Carlson ordered a study of all SUNY campuses the year he became president, and one of those big things was a study of fraternity and sorority life. And the things he found were things like this were happening with national organizations. And so what caused this change? And in my research I found it is almost everything to do with the GI Bill. Veterans are coming to campuses and bringing with them a new sense of maturity that have not been seen on college campuses before. They're bringing with them this expanded idea of brotherhood, which is going to be absolutely key. They don't believe that you have to be Caucasian to be my brother. You don't have to be Christian to be my brother. You don't have to be this. When they were deciding who they wanted to be their brother, they based it strictly on the quality of their character. And so this idea comes from men who had just fought against Nazi Germany, against racism, and here they are facing it in their own country. And so one really good example of maturity is, if we go back a few slides, we can see right down there in the bottom corner, let's see if we can get this right, that man right there, that his name is Kurt Rosenbaum. He was a Holocaust survivor that had joined Alpha Pi Alpha. And the way the men of Alpha Pi Alpha spoke about him was just, you could hear in your head as you were reading it to yourself the respect they had for this man and the sense and the maturity that this man brought to this chapter. He was older than most of the other members, and that was a trend that would continue to grow in the 1950s. And so why is this happening to fraternities? I found a statistic that said during this time, more than half of the membership in fraternities were ex-servicemen. And so there's a real demographic change here. And so then you ask yourself, why does William Carlson care about discrimination in fraternities? He's a president of SUNY. What does that matter to him? As it turns out, he served in the armed forces during World War II. And so we see, even though that there are collegiate members who feel this way, having served in the armed forces is a big push to end this exclusionary measure. And so there are other things that we can see that veterans kind of brought change to college campuses across the United States. One of them is this change in tradition. Prior to 1945, the tradition of the old fraternity was not to accept members who were different than them. These new men, post-war, are very much about inclusion of people that they would like to see be their brothers. And these new values don't line up with the old values of the fraternity, these traditions, and they aren't there. And the last thing that I saw that set these men apart in the new fraternity was the idea of autonomy. These men wanted to be autonomous. They wanted, and they thought that they deserved the right to pick who their brothers were going to be, and no one was going to tell them otherwise. And now I'm just going to show you guys a few things that some of you might be familiar with, but not everyone. So this is the ritual book of Sigma Nu Fraternity. Ritual is something that's performed at in a national organization. The same ritual is performed at every chapter across the United States. So a chapter of Sigma Nu in New York is doing the same rituals as a chapter in California. And so rituals are based on values. And now the values between the old fraternity and the new fraternity, they're not matching. There's a huge disconnect there. And we can see this with Alpha Pi Alpha, where this gentleman's agreement, these men came into this fraternity not knowing about this gentleman's agreement. They didn't know this was part of the tradition of Alpha Pi Alpha. And when you read what they say, I had no idea. If I knew, I wouldn't have joined. These are my brothers. These are the people I want. We don't only see it in Alpha Pi Alpha. In an article written by D.F. Malcolm, you're reading it and you're like, wow, he really hates fraternities. He advocates for removing fraternities from all college campuses. And at the very end, he lets you in on a little secret that he was in a fraternity. And the reason he hates fraternities is because while he was a collegiate member, he joined a fraternity. And then that conversation came up on his campus, these restrictive membership clauses. And he didn't know, but his own fraternity had a restrictive membership clause. And he recites to you, I had no idea, no one bothered to tell me, he says. He's offended that his own brothers didn't tell him. His rejection of this tradition is really something that he felt strongly about and felt betrayed by. And so there are other traditions that have kind of made it through the years. I don't know, well, I guess paddling is one of those things that made it through the 1950s, but has since, it's becoming less and less okay, in a way, in fraternity and sorority life. I don't know if anyone can tell me who that is. I know it's kind of hard to see. Does anyone know who that is up there in the front? That's Ronald Reagan, actually. So some of these traditions really do resonate with some people. And so this is just another example of a tradition that has been condemned in the past year, something called Old South, where members of a sorority and a fraternity would dress up and reenact a Confederate ball, and has only just recently been condemned. But it's things like this where we're learning that the values of the old fraternity aren't matching up with the values of the new fraternity. And so, aside from values, there are other things that I mentioned before. One of them is individuality and desire to be independent. And these are quotes from the charter members of Alpha Pi Alpha. This is the way they felt when they told they couldn't have brothers that they chose in their organization. It says, we found ourselves in a situation where somebody from the outside, and they're talking about their nationals there, was telling us who we could and could not affiliate with. This was our choice, it wasn't their choice. And no one outside should interfere with that. We were mad, we were very mad about this. So it's obvious by the quote, he's upset. He's not getting to choose who his own brothers are, and he just thinks that is he thinks that is his right. And this is one of the less scathing ones that I found. There are quotes upon quotes about how angry these men were. And another one I have here says, those people up there, again referring to the Nationals, were not going to tell us how to run our lives and what to do. We had people who wanted to affiliate with us, and nobody was going to tell us that we couldn't do that. Who the hell were these people to tell us what we could do with our lives? Again, upset that whoever these people thought they were, they thought that they could tell us who our brothers could and couldn't be, and they weren't going to stand for that. They felt that they had the decision, they should have that decision. And so one last example of a desire to be independent is another article I was reading, and as I was reading it, and I think a lot of fraternity and sorority members would agree with me, if they read this, they would be extremely offended. The tone is nasty, the tone is mean, and this is a picture from the article where the author is making fun of fraternity men for liking one another, for loving one another, for being there for one another. And just like in the last article, in one of the other articles, he lets you in on a little secret that he also was in a fraternity. And why does he hate it? While he was at his, while he was in college at his fraternity, they invited an African American into membership, and the National immediately came in, shut down the chapter, disbanded the brothers, and that was the end of it. And so this man came into this brotherhood expecting something, and it wasn't there. And he struggled with that, and a lot of fraternity members at the time struggled with it. And so kind of just to conclude, kind of think of this as, this is the mind of a veteran coming back to college for the first time. They have this expanded concept of brotherhood, which is key, absolutely key in understanding this. And then they're rejecting this tradition and these values that don't fit with them anymore because of the things that they've experienced. And again, They want to make their own decisions. They want to be individuals, and it's, again, coming from their experiences in World War II.